Welcome to the State of the Nation. As South Africa heads towards probably our most important general election since 1947, because it's the first time that the ruling party is definitely in danger of losing a majority, the opposition becomes very, very, very important. Now, we've all heard it said that the opposition parties aren't doing a good job, or who do I vote for? Well, as many people that have watched the State of the Nation will know by now, I don't agree in that at all. I think we have options. Many options have emerged as a result of some of the dilemmas that we have in South Africa, and I think that's a very, very good thing. And one of the very prominent new parties that has emerged has been Build One South Africa, and that has been headed by its leader and founder, Mr. Mmusi Maimane. Mmusi, welcome back to the State of the Nation. So good to have you back.
Thank you so much for having me, and good to see you, Mike.
But you've brought a little bit of help here, eh?
I needed
help,
reinforcement.
You developed some reinforcements, and that reinforcement is in the wonderful form of Nobuntu Webster, who is the deputy leader of Build One South Africa. Nobuntu, welcome to the State of the Nation, your first trip here. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And, you know, what we really are trying to do is we're trying to do a bit of a temperature check on some of these opposition parties. How's it going? What you're doing? And, you know, so that people can understand that it's not just Mmusi putting his name down on a piece of paper and remember me and vote for it. There's a lot more going on in Build One South Africa than just Mmusi Maimane on a ballot sheet.
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, we had and maybe the best place to start would be to look at our launch of our jobs plan. Because what that does is that it makes the promise to say, let's ensure that there's a job in every home. Because if 40% of households in this country are living without income, only on remittances and welfare, you are creating in many ways a society upon which, if you like, of some form of separate development where others are hungry and others are not. And therefore, we've got to build a society upon which all can prosper, regardless of race, regardless of where they come from. We need shared growth. And so, in many ways, starting with that message and that ambition, we've been able to craft that message strongly. It's landed in many South Africans who are saying, you guys aren't just, politicking. You're doing the hard work of asking the question that of speaking to our felt need. Because I think this country, this election is a referendum on the future of this country on the basis of its economic performance. The second dynamic is, since we've launched, we've been very intentional about going, let's appoint and partner with people who bring ethical leadership to public service. Because it's irrelevant in some ways what your plan is. If you don't have the capability of government and the ethical leadership, you are incapable of delivering against that promise. And maybe in some ways that sums up the last 15 years of South Africa. That when your leaders are not ethical, competent, able to deliver, your ability to prosper as a nation is severely impaired. And so we've attracted candidates from communities. We've asked communities to nominate those people. We've asked those citizens to be accountable to those. And I'm grateful that when you look through our list, and we're about the only party that have stepped up forward and said, here's our list, interrogate it, you'll discover that the amount of talent that sits there is better than any caucus I've been a part of. And more than anything, its distribution of qualification is higher than any caucus I've ever been a part of, and many others, because we've made it part to say politics shouldn't be just to politicians. If you do that, it's a dangerous thing. You want people like Nobuntu who've come from business, who have their own qualifications. You want various people who are lawyers, advocates. You want that, because actually it brings a better contestation of ideas, and it means that when you set policy in public institutions, you're able to do so with the appropriate skill set to match. The last thing I'll say is we've also heavily invested in growing in communities and saying, rather than be talk shops, let's be a government in working. And Nobuntu will speak a lot more about that. as we recognize that as government failure occurs on bulk infrastructural issues, of which one central is water, it's been quite, regardless of what the electoral score delivers, I'm grateful to say, as an existence of BOSA, I can cite communities who before didn't have water or boreholes or any of that, and we fought to fund, fight, install, and ensure those are delivered. So on the back of that, I feel that there's a genuine attraction to BOSA. I think we're the only ones on the ballot who can stand up proudly and say, in our midst are Black South Africans, white South Africans, Indian South Africans, colored South Africans. In our midst, we have a variety of religious persuasions that can come on board. You've got Christians, you've got Jews, you've got Muslims, you've got different people. Because I reject notionally this idea that we should go into this election to go express our race, to go express our religion. I want us to go in there to say, regardless of our diversity, we have the pursuit of building a South Africa that prospers. So I'm happy.
That's fantastic. Now, Nobuntu, you haven't been here before, and many people that are watching this don't know you. And we were chatting a little bit earlier the danger that some of the new parties may have, especially those with prominent leaders like Musi, is that people start thinking, oh, well, it's Musi Maimani's party, and you start getting this vision in your mind that it's a bit like Bantu Holomisa, one guy sitting over there making every decision, or the EFF, where it looks like it's just one person in charge. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So my background is in business and a lot of activism in different forms. I've been sitting on boards of NPOs. I've been part of movements. I was actually part of the Unite Against Corruption movement a couple of years ago. And really what it is I've even with my business, it's been a form of activism. I mean, we talk now about...
Business is activism, isn't it?
Business is activism, if you use it in that way. It has been for me. We talk now about our jobs plan. And really at the core of that is trying to create work for South Africans. But more than anything, I mean, when we talk a little bit more about our jobs plan, part of our focus is building township economies, because it is important that we're able to start making sure that people have the opportunity to create something, to create business. The mainstream economy can't absorb the number of people that we have that are unemployed in this country. You've got to expand the economy and you have to create more opportunity. And so in being in business, mine was always to say, how do I contribute to the economy? But more than anything, how do I then give an opportunity to young people to be able to work, but also to be able to have the skills to go and start their own businesses where they stay and start to improve the ecosystem, to be part of the ecosystem and improve the economic ecosystem where they are. So really, that's who I am. I'm somebody who, in everything I've done, has always been about contributing particularly to economic development in this country. And a time comes where all these things that you're doing are contributing in some small way. But you get to a point, and I got to a point where I realized that in order to be able to see change in this country, there's nobody who's coming to save us. And so a few of us who call ourselves leaders in communities, in constituencies, in this country, have to then put our own hands into the work that's being done. We need to go on the ground and start doing the work. And so that's why we're here. So as part of starting Build One South Africa with Musi, and we're here and we have South Africans who understand the vision, who understand the mission, and who have come on board and are working with us.
Now, Nobuntu, I'm fascinated by the township economy. We were lucky enough to speak to somebody like Gigi Alcock, who wrote Casinomics and the follow-up books. And in your experience, as you head towards elections, what has been the biggest challenge to those township entrepreneurs running what is, without question, the South Africa's sadly best kept secret, which is the township economy, which, sometimes I'm not 100% sure why the government doesn't want to trumpet it. But what are the challenges that they have that BOSA will solve for the township entrepreneur?
You're speaking about why you wonder why government wouldn't want to solve for that. And if you look at some of the policies that exist now, there are policies that speak to that. But the reality is that, as Musi said, when you don't have the right people, you don't have the political will, when you don't have ethical leaders that are willing to be able to make sure that that is implemented in the way it should be, that's why we end up where we are. So first of all, part of the challenges that township businesses face and the township economy faces is infrastructure. So you can't say, for instance, that you want to stimulate a township economy and you're not able to provide infrastructure, ICT infrastructure, roads, everything that you need to keep businesses running. I mean, right now there's been a water crisis in Mamelodi, and yesterday we were speaking to business people in Mamelodi who have been reeling from this water crisis because for over a week they've not had water, and some of them have had to close their businesses for a week. So you speak of those issues, basic services, infrastructure, and then you can't then stimulate the township economy if you don't have those basic services and you don't give the kind of focus in those areas to making sure that is efficient and capable as you do in others. The second is that of investment. Really and truly speaking, we have funds, numerous funds that have been made available for particularly small business. We have barely ever had funds that are ring-fenced for township economy, and that has to happen. In our jobs plan, we've tabled a jobs and justice fund that would be administrated by public finance professionals, because the other issues that we've had funds, various funds through the DTI and other departments, and that money has always not always reached the people that it needs to reach. It's not always reached the businesses that it needs to reach. So those are the issues that township businesses face. First of all, you have to solve for the issue of infrastructure. You have to solve for the issue of basic services. And then you have to be willing to invest in township businesses and make sure that the support is there for them to grow.
Because there's no doubt that the spirit is there and people are starting to solve for themselves in many cases, which is great. But, we are paying taxes at the end of the day. And I
just want to add one thing. You also have to have the belief and imagination in township businesses. There's this video doing the rounds where you have some ANC people who are in a township. There's the road isn't tarred. They're eating some chicken and they're like, and they're throwing the bones in the road, and they're talking about how, this is township economy. You have to be able to imagine and believe that it can be more and it can be bigger. You have to be able to imagine a manufacturing sector that is thriving in townships. You have to be able to imagine an ICT sector that is thriving in townships. So it's got to be
tourism sector
that's thriving.
I mean, if I can, one of the mistakes that often people make is that they presume that goods produced in townships must be consumed in townships, which is not the vision. The vision is that township manufacturing hubs must be able to deliver to the broader South African economy, and if by all means, to an international audience. So I want to practically, there's an unbelievable world-class call center in Delft, a township outside the city of Cape Town. I've been to enough call centers, I've set some up myself, so I know what it takes. This has the most unbelievable technology, but it relies on a few things that are absolutely vital. The first is, as Nobuntu correctly points, infrastructure. But if you can't keep the lights on, that call center cannot work. It depends on the provision of bulk services. So if there's no water there, no one can come to work. And it needs to ensure that the community of Delft is safe. Otherwise, the people who are walking to work can't. The advantages, though, are such that that call center, South Africa's almost immediate advantage here is that we sit on a central timeline, which means we can service the world. Our accents and language competency is good. It's not like when you sit on an Indian call center, sometimes you battle to accents become an inhibitor, whereas our accents are phenomenal. They work for international markets. Thirdly, there's a benefit to the family in that when people work closer to home, the stability of that family is stronger, because then kids are not raising themselves. It means that that child of that call center agent knows that their mother or father are able to interact with them, their stability, which is crucial if we're going to heal not only the economic pain in the country, but the psychological wound of citizens. And so, to me, it is a very deliberate strategy of saying the opportunity is there. It needs an effective partner that can enhance that. And there are many examples like that.
Now, Musi, we were lucky enough to speak almost from the time that you announced the establishment of Build One South Africa as a political party. Originally, you had discussed being a home for independence. They've got a little bit kind of difficult to manage, and you launched the party. Now, the thing that's been astounding to me has been the amount of work that's gone into it, right? Yeah, I think to anybody that's out there, I've been startled as somebody that's been doing this now for a couple of years, that you think, and there's still this idea. We saw it recently when some rich people thought they could helicopter people in to run the country. Everybody would just get it and vote for that. It doesn't work that way. So I want you to do two things. I want you to explain to people the importance of the work you're doing in the growing of a proper political party, sort of the importance of branches and reach, right? And then to give us an update of what's happened since we last spoke, which was sort of towards the end of last year.
So, some crucial things. The first is our vision of being able to work in partnership with communities is something we haven't lost. I think often people want to synonymize that with a home for independence. And I think even in our court judgment, people thought we were just fighting for independence. But actually, the issue is deeper than that. It's about fighting for ensuring that citizens have the power to directly elect their representatives. Now, the Constitution of South Africa lays itself out to say, at the apex, at national sphere of government, you have obligations around safety, around healthcare, around education. You and I are recording this right here in Parkhurst. Now, what's fascinating for me is that if you have a problem with the school here, the clinic here, anything, who do you go to? You can't go to your ward councillor. They only deal with roads and other things. So we have to continue the fight for a constituency-based model that reforms the Electoral Act so that one day when citizens in this community and other communities battle, they can directly say, our member of parliament must come and explain to us why there's no schools, there's no hospitals, etc. And we found, so to give you an update, when I was speaking earlier about candidates we've been able to get through, you can't be a BOSA candidate unless you represent a particular community. And that's been very, very successful for us because now we've working in that and making sure that even in campaign, people must be able to go and work in that. And work in those communities. Because at the end of the day, it's those people who must vote for the person. And it's those people who must recall the person. And so we make it straightforward. If you don't have 1,000 signatures to start, you can't end up on the program, literally. So that's been a really, really important thing. The second thing I want to say is, the work of building communities and building, I'm not wanting to build on the model of the ANC as a party. We've certainly never laid ourselves out in that way because then you end up with an NEC that has to meet, and then after that you have top 6, and then after that you have branches. Some of those branches are only there just so that they can elect leaders, and then they are bought, and then it's a corrupt system.
And then eventually you have to have a launch in a stadium.
You know what I mean? It's all becoming corrupt. I think modern political parties can benefit from a number of crucial assets that have come. The first is the proliferation of technology. There are more smartphones in this country than there are people. So suddenly we can hold...
Maybe we should let the smartphones vote.
or vote through a smartphone.
Yeah.
Using blockchain technology will help us a little bit. But like even last night, we're able to hold a town hall meeting with typically the same number of people as you would say, for argument's sake, have at an NEC, but you can hold it virtually and from the comfort of people's homes. So there's a modernization in this exercise that we've taken on board. We don't build infrastructure. We also we believe that the function of people's association with a political party is to campaign for those ideals, not to spend all your life trying to figure out who the next leader is and all of that. I think that sometimes is problematic. But go out and do that. And then also in units, so people can interact with people about policy ideas, get feedback from people, so that the system is continuously dynamic. So since we last spoke, we've been very clear in honing in our message, what our place in the world is. We've recruited activists in communities. We're signing up people to campaign more than ever before. And I'm grateful that I can wake up on any given morning knowing very well that if you say, let's go to Limpopo, there are people in various regions of Limpopo going out there in communities daily. I can go to Eastern Cape, I can go to KZN, Gauteng, and to build that national infrastructure, that's a bit that takes time. And that's why often I discourage people from saying, don't think if you've got a person or a personality and a logo, you can suddenly start a political party. It doesn't work like that. It takes institutional governance. And Nobuntu heads up so much of the work that does the institutional governance work, compliance with the IEC, making sure that we are accountable to the people, but we are future-looking and distinctive as a party.
So Nobuntu, in terms of reach of Build One South Africa, you know, I know that you know, I keep an eye on the work that all the parties are doing, but this is always a wonderful opportunity to hear directly from the parties, to say, first question that you probably have to answer a lot is, are you going to be represented in all 9 provinces?
Absolutely. So we have representation in all 9 provinces. We've got campaign teams in every single one of the 9 provinces. We've got provincial conveners in every single one of the 9 provinces. And this is something that we had quite early on.
Yes.
I mean, within 4 or 5 months, we had that in our party. And like Musi says, that's been the hardest work, because first of all, we created a model where we wanted to have diverse citizens and diverse leaders, making sure that we represent various facets of society. And so we've made sure that we've done that. Secondly, we wanted to make sure that we had the kind of structure where we're able to speak directly to communities. So you speak of our manifesto launch, the jobs plan this past Sunday. It took a long time to create that and to develop that, because we've been in communities, listening to communities and hearing from communities. And that's been possible because, as Musi says, our campaign teams are our campaign teams, and we're not doing this through 4 or 5 structures and we ultimately get to the bottom. We go directly to the people and we hear from people what is important to them and what matters to them as South Africans. So we're in all 9 provinces. We understand the nuances of each province. We understand the challenges. We understand the broad challenges in South Africa, but also then how they're nuanced in each province, and how you have to, you know, handle and approach each issue in each province. So we absolutely are in every province, and we will be contesting in every province, and we are currently campaigning in every province.
Okay, well, you mentioned the manifesto launch. We've spoken about the jobs plan. What are some of the other key decisions that were taken, or key announcements that you are most excited about, you know, as the deputy leader of this new party?
So look, when we talk of the jobs plan, we speak of various other factors that are important, that we have to table policy for in order to be able to create jobs in this country. And so when we tabled the jobs plan, we spoke to the issue of education, reforming education. We spoke to the issue.
What would that reform look like? Because there's clearly, you know, we sort of at the beginning of the year, which means we've just gone through the trauma of the South African trauma of the matric results and the whole argument about whether we're measuring the right things or doing the right things. What is your take and your plan when it comes to education? Because this is obviously at the crux of many of our problems.
So the first issue about the education in this country is the quality of education, and the second is accessibility to education. Right. And so when you look at the issue of education, and when we've looked at the issue of education, we've looked at both, and there's a number of factors to look at and to consider when you're looking at quality. The first is what we've just seen as a high matric pass rate, having not taken into consideration things like the pass mark. So fundamental subjects that have a pass mark of 30 or 40%. And that in itself compromises the quality of education that young people are getting. I'm in business. And so, you know, I've often, you know, my businesses have hired young people, and I've seen through the years that the deteriorating quality, the deteriorating output that comes out, and people are not work ready. They don't have work readiness. And this isn't only because some of them aren't able. First of all, the issue is some of them aren't able to get into institutions of higher learning. The throughput rate is not high. And then the second is that our system is not setting them up to be able to be work ready, because of the pass mark, but also because of the relevance that is in the classroom. So that is one of the issues that we're looking at as it pertains to quality of education in this country. And it is by far something that is really, really, you look at the 70% unemployment rate of young people in this country. And part of it is that they're unemployable.
But now you've mentioned the the problem, which we all agree on. What I'm really after is your suggestion for the solution.
Yeah, let me highlight just a few things. And this was distinctive about that. I've spoken at length about putting a voucher system in education. Fundamentally because as a parent, I know how much fees cost. And so the first starting point is that the state already spends, I think it's just over 13,000 Rand per child per year. We'd increase that to give a parent a voucher to the equivalent. So now a parent has got spending capability. The second is I've always proposed a Jobs and Justice Fund, which accrues funding that makes sure that we can, rather than we intervene in many other sectors, but intervening in education says, let's give money so that a school, and I want to make it practical so that people can see it for themselves. In my street in Dobsonville, there's a school down the road. It's been declining in numbers because the quality of teaching is poor for all of the variables. Now, I can sit down with another private institution, Curo, whatever the other ones, or even Quintile 5 schools, which are high fee paying schools. Partner with them and say, why don't you set up a satellite campus in Dobsonville? The parents have already got spending capability. I will subsidize part of that with this Jobs and Justice Fund. The state already can contribute the following things, not only the voucher, but the infrastructure, because the buildings are there. We can subsidize some of the teaching because the teachers are there. But I'm asking you to set up a satellite campus that adds them. So let's assume, conceivably, the fees then work out to 25,000, which is an additional 10,000 Rand extra, or whatever. Now you've got a subsidy that comes through the Jobs and Justice Fund. And then I can come to the parents in Dobsonville and say, for a Curo quality or a Quintile 5 or high fee paying school, all you have to do is pay 500 Rands a month and you can walk to school and you can go there. We've stemmed the tide of standing outside the highways of townships where we watch kids literally commute for hours to other schools, which takes them out their community. Whereas now suddenly you build centers of learning there. And now if you've got a voucher system, parents, even the school suddenly goes, we got to compete for our learners. They're not just automatically given to us by feeder area. And then, of course, other things on curriculum, strengthening STEM subjects. And then, of course, Nobuntu has highlighted the issue of the pass mark, but also the infrastructure build. Then you're starting to solve through this justice fund because you eradicate things like pit latrines and all sorts of things like that, and kids having to cross rivers to go to schools. So for us, voucherize it, make it incredibly competitive.
That is by far the most concrete and best idea I've heard around education, but for one thing that you haven't mentioned in there, and that is that, and we have a similar issue around the national health insurance, and that is that how does one solve for teachers that are not doing their jobs? Because we've got a teaching crisis.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I'm actually a little bit less obsessed with the pass mark thing because, the dirty little secret is that in apartheid South Africa, the pass mark was 40%. Everybody wants to act like it was 80%. It wasn't. No, right? So let's understand that, the pass mark could be raised because we want to be better people. But all our wants and all our vouchers are not going to help if SATU doesn't want the teachers to teach.
Yeah.
So what is the BOSA solution to that? Because that's going to become a critical issue. And let's just say you get elected, you get 50% plus one, please God, and now we've got President Maimane. You are going to have a fight the very next day when you try and do this at schools.
The good news is that when you empower parents, because our Schools Act, which is part of what's been challenged now through this Bella Act, our Schools Act makes it such that the school governing body is the ultimate authority in the school as it pertains to various issues, policy and appointment of headmasters, etc. What the ANC has done is that it ceded that work to the unions and allowed unions in a report that was tabled, which is Jobs for Cash, to capture the education system, which meant that it was the unions who were appointing headmasters. And the lesson that we learn from that is that as leadership goes in a school, so does the quality of education offered in that school. So when we increase pass marks and we do accountability assessments, the limiting of the power of the unions must be the empowerment of the parents. Because if a parent has got purchasing power and you deliver a headmaster that's unionized and cannot work through, the parents can withdraw that and find another institution. And trust me, the culture will be eradicated. To go into a head-to-head fight with unions is never an ANC battle that they're going to win, because they need those votes. SATU is the electoral machine, if you like. Yeah. What we've got to do is, as I said, empower through vouchers, go back to an independent education ombudsman, which we've proposed in our policy, that then says things like the annual national assessments, which the unions kicked against, because it's no use discovering at grade 11 that the teacher who's been on the pipeline there has not been doing the job. You want to do annual national assessment so that you have continuous improvement and you can deal with it quicker. And then you can know quickly, we don't have the funding for this teacher because they're not performing. It's a direct line. And so here's some key things. That's why I think it's nebulous. You are correct when you talk about the traumatization of the matric results, because it's this fanfare of emptiness. Mm-hmm. How can 8 in the report that indicates that 8 out of 10 of our children cannot read for meaning, suddenly they achieve an 82% pass rate in matric? It's anomalous. It's like miraculous if you think about it. So annual national assessments allow us to intervene far earlier. They allow us to look at things like PIRLS reports and study the correct subjects and make sure that accountability is felt at primary school, before kids get to school, so that the ecosystem of education works all the way through.
Okay. Now, you've made a lot of mention on empowering parents, but that follows through. And South Africa has certain social challenges that of parents that are maybe not as involved as they should be. There's been a big reliance historically in all sectors of our population on the state. Pretoria shall provide. How is BOSA looking at that, Nobuntu?
So we spoke earlier about part of that issue being a social issue.
Yeah.
When you speak about parents who aren't involved, a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're not there. You look at the issue of parents who have to travel to work every single day. And when you're creating employment where people live, when the schools are where the children live, you're creating more opportunity for that engagement to happen. You're creating more opportunity for those children to be more involved in the work and in the lives of, so parents to be involved in the work and in the life of those children. So that's the first thing that's critically important. The second is just creating a culture of responsibility. I think in South Africa, we've really created a culture of outsourcing responsibility, whether it's, and you look at it quite vastly, there's an entitlement culture that we've created in South Africa, and we have to create a culture of responsibility for ourselves and for the work that we do and for the children that we raise, in order to be able to see a shift, even in things like education and the participation of parents in education. Also important to have in the structures of schools opportunity for participation for parents in the schools. And once you have an environment where parents are able to, and the ecosystem allows for them to, you're able to see that participation improve.
If we don't use the measure of wealth as a function of responsibility or intellect, and assume that all parents, whether rich or poor, want the same thing for their kids, I can assure you, regardless of where the school community is at, there is a genuine interest in parents being able to see their education go forward. There's a parenting thing that says, I want my kids to be better than what I was. That's why if you see those taxis and public transport things leave townships, because parents recognize that through education there's a pathway. Now, we've got to make it possible. We got to make that possible even closer to the ground. And that's why one of the things is, even in the composition of the governing body, we've got to say to ourselves, parental involvement must be structured in the following manner so that parents are involved. It's in the law. It allows them to do that. But to the point that Nobuntu is making, let's make sure transport is easier, parents are closer to home, schools are working closer to home, so that those parents can participate. But also one of the things I'm really keen to do is to also give the governing body the latitude to be able to co-opt 1 or 2 parents who may not have kids in the school, who might be able to do so. Often I speak to accountants and people from firms, law firms, who say, I want to contribute. I want to contribute as a function of justice. So now you want those people to be able to serve in a school governing body, because often if I put a school, and I'm being practical here, in Orange Farm, right? You find that the principal can bamboozle the parents because you find the income level of parents is low and all of that. They just tell them whatever and the parents kind of think that makes sense. Whereas if you have an accountant on the board, you can plan better. You can achieve financial stability of that school. If you have a lawyer, you can make sure that the principal is operating within the law and the parents are able to do so. Suddenly we build a prosperous South Africa together because now I can leverage the skills that sit elsewhere to be able to put them into the governance infrastructure of a school.
If I can add, the other important thing is the restoring of agency, right? And so if you look at that voucher program that we're talking about in schools, when parents are now able to choose their own school, I think, for me, one of the biggest indignities is not being able to choose the school that your child goes to. And so when you have that restoration of agency, parents will want to take, more responsibility in the school. They've got money. It's there. I've chosen the school. This is the school I've chosen for my child. And you then give back people their agency in terms of their participation.
No, Nobuntu, you've made a terrible mistake because you mentioned the word that sets me off every time, and that is the word agency, which I absolutely adore. Agency is so important, and any authoritarian government, the first thing they try and do is curb agency, right? And we've had, I was going to say 30, but I'm going to spread that out to 80 years across the country of a government, nationalist governments, and nationalist governments, by their very definition, do not want people to have agency because they're terrified by agency, right? I recently had a discussion about somebody, in fact, it was Carl Niehaus who, yes, I did.
Well done.
Please watch it, it was fun. Where he set off on his tirade as he does about gear. And I said, what was the problem with gear? Were you just terrified that too many people were getting agency? So, and I do understand, as imperfect as it was, it delivered growth. A lot of things were moving in South Africa under that particular policy. I want to talk on a broader scale about your economic policy, because this is obviously, it's almost like we've forgotten about economic policy in South Africa as unemployment gently skyrockets and we run out of power and we run out of skilled people. What is the Build One South Africa economic policy changes that your voters can look forward to?
Yeah, and this is a great question, Mike, because departing from the notion of agency, I'm convinced that if we successfully implement the policy suite that Build One South Africa will put on the table, it'll give people the right to make the choices that they want. In fact, I'm even so radical as saying that even on a housing platform, the state can act as a, if you like, a bank, because wealthier citizens, if they want to buy a house, they go to a bank and they can design their house and then purchase accordingly. Why are we copy-pasting these RDP houses and saying, all of you, regardless of whether you've got 1 child, 3 children, 10 children, all of you must have the same house? It's nonsense. It takes away the right for people to exercise. And I always think whenever someone says to you, this government wants to keep people poor because no, poor people have as much cognitive and competence as anybody else. They just don't have the money. What we've got to figure out is, as we empower through financial institutions, they can exercise their choice even much more so. And that's the power. So when you talk about macroeconomic policy, I think on the first, it's the broader, we depart from a radical centrist point of view, right? Which is a sense upon which we argue the case that, for example, the first economic conditions is about making sure that you fix the bulk infrastructure issues, and that's about Eskom. And on the Eskom front, I've always proposed things like build, own, operate, which gives mass producers or mass consumers of energy the right to build, own, operate their own sub-power stations. So if you run a mine, BOSA will make sure you can be able to do that so that you can either offset it back into the grid or you can take yourself completely off the grid. That reduces baseload. That reduces demand in many ways. Furthermore, we've spoken about safe SMRs, which are modular reactors, which we can augment the energy base so that we can put a base load on the table. And that speaks to the second issue, which is about taking an institution like Transnet, and this is where radical centrism works. I don't believe that the government is effective at the only mover of goods, both from a port's point of view and a people point of view. So we've got to create the breaking up of that entity and creating public-private partnerships. I think other parts of the world can demonstrate better management of ports management, so we can do that, so there's efficiency of movement of goods. But we want to decentralize the ability for cities, provinces to be able to build transport infrastructure so that actually more and more people are able to rely on public transport to get to work, and it cheapens it. And public transport is not a profit-making mechanism, it's a public good. So if you travel to any city in the world, you'll discover very quickly that public transport is an efficient way of getting through. I was in Washington recently, and I had to defend on the Amtrak, and so you just get on with it because it's an economic enabler. I think we've spoken a bit earlier on today about the digital migration, making sure that data prices are easier. And I'm taking a fight even right now against the big two players, MTN and Vodacom. I think there are new institutions like Mellon who are coming on board and competing strongly. So we're going to use that to give data prices lower so that more people can participate, and broader technological infrastructure rollout in townships, in the same way as if 94 was a rollout of electricity, let 2024 be the rollout of digital infrastructure in a much more effective way. And then we've spoken about safety. The safety as it links to the economic part speaks really to the idea of decentralizing police and making sure that it can be run in communities, in provinces. Why? Because you can add to manpower of policing. You can utilize metro police better, because the metro police that I bump into are forever trying to check whether my license disc is up to date or not, rather than fighting criminals. And furthermore, you free up your detectives who used to work in the South African National Police to be able to fight priority crimes like murder. We must prioritize murder and reduce it, because when people are being murdered, there's no economy that can grow within that. That's on the macro. And then on the micro stuff, the Jobs and Justice Fund, which is in some ways a national venture capital fund that will allow for funding of startups, is a fundamental key issue to be able to drive economic growth and stimulate micro enterprise. Thirdly, it's about ensuring that we have a national civilian service that attracts young people who are school leavers so that they can spend a year doing 6 months of internship and 6 months of actual work readiness. Because what we're discovering is that the same cohort of kids who've just passed now are going to spend a year. Most of them can't go to university. 59% of them can't, because they didn't qualify for university. Now, what are you asking those young people to do? Give them a national civilian service as an option so that they can work in some of state programs, but also allow them to learn some work experiences. That's on some of the micro interventions. And I always thought that the best way in some ways to fix some of the city, the economic issues, is to fix some of the city functioning. Because if Joburg doesn't have proper roads, doesn't have proper distribution or reticulation of water, it is never going to help businesses. So let's fix the capability of cities by building capable states, both at local level and at national level, because then that way you can be able to create an economy that can rely on regulatory framework that works, laws that are consistent, and transparency in terms of adjudication of tenders.
Okay, so now I just want to use two practical examples because they're both quite recent. Gwedi Mantashe has basically held the mining industry at ransom for the last 4 or 5 years because the mining industry had no cadastre, as called, right? And that's where you can see all the mining rights as they're issued, where they are, what they are. It's basically a central database specific for mining. When one exists from a Canadian producer that's done this all over the world and clearly got a handle on these things. And clearly it's now coming in, but obviously a deal had to be cut. We saw Elon Musk with Starlink, which was going to provide cheap, high-speed internet anywhere in the country, stopped because he had to have a BE partner. Where does Build One South Africa stand on those kind of issues?
On the first, it's vital that there's absolute transparency in mining rights, and the speed with which they're adjudicated must be done quickly. Because
but it was stopped because of the software provider was first shaken down.
No, but your biggest dilemma is the fact that there is a dogmatic view that is held by the ANC that says the state is the is the only institution capable of people's development. That dogmatic view is problematic in that the state then seeks to control everything. And that's where I don't want to typecast Gwede, but almost certainly that's his view of the world. So he thinks the state can run everything. As I think if we use technology, we're able to use all the transparency issues that go with explorations, adjudication of mining rights, and ensuring that we can, because speed is key here. If you're going to lay out a 20-year investment in a mine, you want to be clear that explorations are done quickly. You want to be able to make a decision about whether there's prospects there. And then ultimately you want to be able to use those minerals and get return on investment quick enough. And often you find people in parliament have never run a business, so they don't follow that cycle. On the Starlink issue, I think, Starlink has been operational in other various parts of the of even the continent, where even laws around local ownership are far higher than us. For example, you can't operate in Kenya without 51% ownership by Kenyans or Tanzanians or all of that. So these laws, sometimes people think South Africa is the only one who's doing it. It's not that dissimilar across the continent. You try and go run a gap. I mean, I'm very good friends with the president.
And how's
of Zambia.
That worked out for the rest of the continent?
Zambia has been doing incredibly well. You are seeing various parts. So these investments are being made. My simple point that I want to make is of course we want partnerships. What you want is, for example, you don't only want... I love what even people like Mercedes-Benz and others are coming in, whilst their ownerships is internationally, but they've come and empowered locals so that we can be able to build industries of the future. That's important for a country. The last thing you need in this country is what has been achieved in the last while, where there's an easy expatriation of capital that doesn't sit here, which means reinvestments becomes harder. So let us be clear that partnership in development must be a relationship that works. I've just come back from the US. This same conversation is taking place there because American businesses also have to figure out how they keep their own sustainability. Because if you don't do that, you then create the absolute conditions for populists to take over.
I want to, if I can come in on your question on BEE.
Yes.
And where BOSA stands on that. When you look at triple BEE, and how it's worked, just as an extension of this issue about partnership with local, with global investors and local partnerships. As it pertains to local business, what you've seen is that you've had a policy that has benefited a few. And I think that is the biggest failure of triple BEE. And so when you listen to our policy and you hear about our Jobs and Justice Fund, that's an empowerment fund where businesses can put their empowerment funds into, and we can ensure
what Elon can do.
That's distributed accordingly. And that's what Elon can do. That's what anyone who does business in South Africa can do. Because then you have a truly broader distribution of business. You have a truly broader distribution of economic opportunity. And on top of that, what you then do, you make sure that you are contributing, and I always speak of this, over the expansion of the economy. Because then when you rely singularly on a mainstream economy as a developing country like South Africa, you find yourself in the position we find ourselves now, where we have 17 million unemployed people.
Lastly, as we close, the election's happening sooner than we expected, perhaps May.
22nd of May.
22nd of May, even though you won't say it, but the 22nd of May. There's Nobuntu and I were having this discussion earlier. We are saying that there's this big sort of, in the prediction scale, there's big question marks next to a couple of the parties because they are completely untested, right? There's almost nothing to go against. And one of the big question marks is against Build One South Africa, purely because there's nothing to go on. What is your realistic expectation? What should people expect?
Mike, you follow football?
I do.
We have a thing in our if you follow football, the top 4 teams play Champions League, right? That's how you qualify for Champions League. And BOSA wants to qualify for Champions League. That's the first thing. So we're playing for qualification. And the second thing is we want to be the central tenant that organizes a grand coalition that brings about change. And part of that is about amassing at least just over 1 million votes, and we want to work towards that. And I think it's possible. I don't think it's impossible at all. it gives us an opportunity to be able to form the rump of, or at least form a significant part of a new government. And furthermore, I think that given my own experience, I'm not asking citizens to believe that there's no party that's going to get a majority in this country. We're heading to coalitions. I've worked coalitions in the past, given just where I've come from and my own history. You know, when we ran in 2014 for Gauteng Premier, we grew the vote here in Gauteng by over 1 million. And I think, so it's not numbers that you just make up. It's just the fact that it is possible. And we're seeing the attraction in communities. We're confident enough that come the elections, BOSA is going to be a significant player post the elections. And I'm, as I sit here today, heading and asking citizens to go, we bring the business experience, the work experience, the parliamentary legislative experience. This is a powerful opportunity to say, don't make this debate about big versus small. That's a poor way of framing the question. Rather frame the question as old versus new. Old wants to keep institutions the same, keep all of that. New says, how do we do future economies? How do we do that? And even on a basic level, if you want to environmentally transition this country globally, what an opportunity Africa and South Africa has. Because now suddenly we could use minerals that sit closer to us here in the continent to be the battery center of the world, the manufacturing capability. I think South Africans, if we've lost anything, we've lost our ability to imagine a different tomorrow. All we've ended up with is fears emanating from our yesterday.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as we head towards an election, you probably have heard it, may even have said it yourselves, that, will my vote matter, or will I be wasting my vote? Well, we have brought to you quite a number of parties, and I can safely say that these parties have done the work. And your vote will not be wasted. One way or another, they're going to show up somewhere. They're going to be in Parliament and they're going to shake up things. New thinking is what South Africa desperately needs. I want to thank Musi Maimane, Nobuntu Slotso Webster. Thank you so much for coming to the State of the Nation. We want to get you on hopefully before the election again so that we can see how it goes. But to everybody that watched it, we hope that we helped you or even perhaps confused you a little bit more ahead of this election, because you do have
a job in every home.
The job in every home. I think that's important. State of the Nation will keep bringing people in the parties to this platform, and we'll keep asking them the hard questions. You keep subscribing and keep watching, and we'll see you the next time on the State of the Nation. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. All right, we've got to run.